So please join me in welcoming Dr. Keanu.
So who doesn't have a package? You good? Okay, I want to make reference to it, that's why as we go along. How's everybody?
Oh my God.
Well, my name is Keanu. For those of you who don't know me, I teach at the University of Hawaii. I'm an adjunct faculty at the College of Education, Graduate Division, where I teach a graduate course on this for people coming in who are getting their master's degree in education. I'm also a faculty at the University of Hawaii Winter Community College. So I teach Introduction to the Hawaiian Kingdom, which is writing intensive, and Introduction to Hawaiian Studies 107. So this past January 16th was a big day, right? A lot of people didn't know what actually happened. People a lot of times focus on January 17th, right, the overthrow. What you'll see is January 16th was actually the invasion, which led to the overthrow, and that's important to know. Because what I'm going to do is explain about Hawaii's history using original documents, drawing from the original documents, but also explaining what those documents mean. Yeah, that's what's important. So basically, I'm going to be getting into why we have been in a state of war with the United States since January 16, 1893. Not because I'm making a position statement, I'm just telling you that's how it is through the law, right? And that's called international law. So what I want to do is kind of teach you how international law works and how it applies to our situation, okay? A lot of people tend to confuse me with the sovereignty movement. I'm not, okay? I'm far from it. I'm not moving towards sovereignty. I'm not trying to get people to believe in something. I just really explain it as to why the country or the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists. So when I speak about the Hawaiian Kingdom, I'm talking about a country. I'm not talking about a group. And I'm talking about the country that my great-grandparents were born into. So my tutu, okay, my grandparents, their parents. So they were born in the 1880s. They were born in a country called the Hawaiian Kingdom, okay? Not the Kingdom of Hawaii. And I want everybody to make sure that when you leave this talk tonight, you're gonna be careful how to use terms, right? It's Hawaiian Kingdom, not Kingdom of Hawaii. Okay? And the reason is, the Kingdom of Hawaii used to exist, separate from the Kingdom of Maui, the Kingdom of Kauai, and the Kingdom of Hawaii. Okay? It was Kamehameha from the Kingdom of Hawaii that consolidated the other kingdoms into one kingdom. Called it the Kingdom of the Sandwich Islands, later called it the Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands, which eventually came to be known as the Hawaiian Kingdom. So when people say Kingdom of Hawaii, it's not correct because it refers to a time up to 1810. From 1810 on, you're talking about a consolidation of multiple kingdoms, okay? I'll give you an example. And these multiple kingdoms consolidated had the same culture and the same language, but yet they were under different kings, okay? Now, in 800 AD, in what we know today as Great Britain, they used to have Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, right? A bunch of them. They all spoke the same language, had the same culture, but they had different kings. One particular king from one particular Anglo-Saxon kingdom was named King Egbert. King Egbert, like Kamehameha, consolidated through war a few of these kingdoms, which came to be known as Anglo-land, Anglo-Saxon Anglo-land, which eventually came to be known as England. Okay? So we have a similar history in that way, right? So that's why I'm saying the Kingdom of Hawaii was like one of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that had other kings. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Because I have that in my dissertation. My dissertation actually covered Hawaii's legal and political history from the 18th century all the way till today. Okay? And it is now put in a history book that is currently being used at the community schools as the history book and many other places, other schools. It's also required text in my classes up at UH as well as other classes. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a particular time frame, what happened in 1893, okay, on January 16th. But before I get there, I got to provide some context. When I say context, I got to provide some explanation. So let's start off with this. What you see up here are just facts, right? Facts. Facts are things that are self-evident, not that you understand. So you got alley-oop, goal line, nose guard, three-point shot, center, touchdown, running back, chin strap, cleats, full court press. That's just a bunch of facts. There's no coherence in all those things. What you have to apply is theory, right? A theoretical framework that is able to explain facts. So the definition of a theory is an explanation of phenomena without which you can't understand them, right? So in order to understand these facts, you need to apply the right theory. So some of these facts apply to a particular theory, and some of the facts apply to another theory. In particular, that's basketball theory. So every fact there has a place and has a meaning. And all the other facts belong to football theory, right? What we've been doing with Hawaii's history is explaining a football game using basketball rules. Not baseball, sorry, basketball, okay? It's really that simple. I had not changed any facts. Seriously, I didn't. I just said, everybody's using the wrong theory. I applied football rules to a football game. All of a sudden, it makes sense, right? Because a lot of people say, hey, how come other people didn't get it up at UH when they did their research? Wrong theory. It's pretty simple, wrong theory, right? That's all it was. Once you apply the right theory, things start to make sense. And now you know when you have the right theory that explains phenomena, something happens to you. You start to predict what's going to happen. You can actually see something coming, right? I just gave a talk on the 16th up at Woodbridge Community College for the classes. And you had one Wahine in the class, Holly girl, served in the Navy, from California, and she saw it. She actually was predicting, okay, wait, this is going to happen, right? Yeah, I know. You got the theory. No, I can see it. Yeah, take it easy. But I told her, that's good. You know, I wasn't trying to shut her up. I'm like, now that's how it's supposed to work, when you start to anticipate something. So, what I'm going to do is explain the appropriate facts of Hawaii's history through football rules. Okay? And that's called international law. You guys ready? Yes. Okay. So, today's perception is that we're the 50th state. Okay, that's an assumption. Okay. When I was in the Army, I remember Lieutenant Colonel told me, hey, Lieutenant, never assume, because you make an ass out of you and me. Assume. You guys got that? Mm-hmm. So this is an assumption. Assumption. Right? And he told me, if you don't know the answer, don't make it up. Yes, sir, I'll get back to you with that information. So this is an assumption, right? That today is what Hawaii today is the 50th state. Okay? And then the predecessor of the 50th state is the Territory of Hawaii, established in 1900. The predecessor of the Territory of Hawaii is the Republic of Hawaii, established in 1894. And the predecessor of the Republic was the Provisional Government. Now what we have here is what I would say is a genealogy, right? A genealogy. They're all connected. But instead of just looking at names on a piece of paper, genealogy, you're supposed to look at who the people were, where did they live, how did they live, and then what you do is you actually bring life to your genealogy, as opposed to just memorizing names, right? Who were they? When we're talking about governments, here, a genealogy of governments, what I would have to ask is, by what authority are they governments? That's the type of question I would have to inquire, right, or pose. So what I want to do is, let's take a look at each of one of these. And by what authority, and exactly what are they? And who created them? And what function do they serve? So the authority of the state of Hawaii, 1959 Statehood Act, passed by the U.S. Congress, Public Law 86-3, an act to provide for the admission of the state of Hawaii into the Union. Okay? Now, okay, that's a law, but what is it? What kind of law? It's called a municipal law. Municipal law, passed by Congress. Keep that in mind, municipal law, because you're going to see that in this narrative, right? So keep that in mind, municipal law is very important. Now, the authority of the territory of Hawaii is an act to provide a government for the territory of Hawaii, passed April 30th, 1900, by the U.S. Congress. It's a municipal law, okay? Just like the Statehood Act. Now, the connection that the territory of Hawaii has to the Republic of Hawaii, which was not established by Congress, is stated in Section 1 under the Act. Definitions. That the phrase, the laws of Hawaii, as used in this Act, without qualifying words, shall mean the Constitution and laws of the Republic of Hawaii, in force on the 12th day of August, 1898. Okay, so there's a direct connection to the Republic of Hawaii. So the territory is the successor to the Republic. Okay. Now, who's the Republic? Well, Congress didn't create the Republic. The Republic was formed on July 3rd, 1894 in Honolulu, which is another country. Okay. Well, this was not a government. It was actually a U.S. installed insurgency. A bunch of insurgents. Another word, keep in mind, insurgent, municipal law. Okay? These words are important in this game of football. Okay? Now, the predecessor of the Republic is the Provisional Government, and they were formed in Honolulu, January 17th, 1893. Okay? And who are they? Well, that actually was the birth of the insurgency, created by a U.S. ambassador assigned to Hawaii. This is called a puppet of the United States ambassador. Okay. So obviously, you might run into some problems because you can't be a government and an insurgency at the same time. Because insurgents overthrow governments. And you have to be successful in the overthrow. So let's take an example of an insurgent that became a patriot. In 1776, George Washington, who was a British subject, was treasonous, committed high treason against the British Crown, because those were British colonies. He was part of an insurgency, right? They fought for 7 years, blood, pain, hurt, and they won. They won the revolution. It took them 7 years to succeed in their revolt against King George. And the Treaty of Paris that ended the revolution, which was in 1783, is when King George III recognized these 13 former British colonies as 13 independent states in a loose union called a confederation. It was at that point that George Washington went from insurgent to patriot. Yeah? And Benedict Arnold went from British patriot to traitor. It just flipped. Yeah? Now that is an example of being a successful revolutionary. It is not good to be a revolutionary and you're not successful yet, because then you're still an insurgent. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So, that's why you can't be an insurgent and a government at the same time. You have to be an insurgent that became the lawful government. Okay. Now, the United States Apology Resolution, folks may remember that, 1993, the United States apologized for the illegal overthrow. And they call it the Kingdom of Hawaii. Everybody keeps using the Kingdom of Hawaii because that's what the U.S. Congress said. That's wrong. Remember, the Kingdom of Hawaii existed before 1810, not after. So, the Joint Resolution of Annexation also raises a question that football theory is able to explain, but basketball theory cannot. My point is, if they're apologizing for the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, did they overthrow the kingdom, which is really the Hawaiian kingdom? Or exactly what did they overthrow? I mean, that's a question, right? See, because in international law and political science, you separate the country from the government. Because you can overthrow a government without overthrowing a country in war. So when Saddam Hussein's government was overthrown in 2003 by the United States military, nobody said the overthrow of Iraq, right? They said the overthrow of the Iraqi regime headed by Saddam Hussein. Iraq still existed. It just came under occupation, right? Now, what we tend to do without knowing the distinction, we assume, as you mean, that the Hawaiian kingdom, not the kingdom of Hawaii, was overthrown. I can tell you it wasn't. Only its government. Okay. Making sense? It's all going to come together as we progress. But bottom line, that apology resolution is just an American law. It's a municipal law. Municipal law, right? Passed by Congress. So the next question would be, the Apology Resolution of 1993, the Statehood Act of 1959, and the Organic Act that formed the territory in 1900, they're all municipal laws enacted by Congress. So the next question that you should be asking yourself is, what? What's the next question you should be asking? What's the definition of municipal law, right? Because all I told you was it's a municipal law. I didn't explain or define what a municipal law was. So you have to look it up, right? And that's what I told my students up at UH. Don't give me an opinion of what a municipal law is. Look it up. So in the dictionary, Black's Law Dictionary, it defines municipal law. So a municipal law is defined as pertaining, quote, solely to the citizens and inhabitants of a state. So it only applies to citizens or the inhabitants of a state, which is a country, and is thus distinguished from international law, right? So how is it distinguished then from international law? Well, municipal laws only apply within a country. International law applies between countries. The word inter is between. International law is literally defined as the law between nations. At the international level, you don't have a lawmaking body that passes laws. What you have are agreements that are entered into between countries, evidenced by a treaty, or understanding of international law universally across all countries, which is called customary international law, and principles. But you don't have a body that makes law. Some people think the United Nations is a legislative body. The United Nations is an organization of independent states. But not all independent states have to be a member of the UN. Today there's 193 members of the UN, but you have 197 independent states internationally. So Kosovo, Palestine, Cook Islands are not members of the United Nations. But that doesn't mean they're not independent states, because the United Nations is just an organization. And when they pass resolutions, a resolution is just a position statement. You know, like when the Grand Poobah in the Water Buffalo Lodge passes a resolution. Okay, see, I can tell how old people are. The Flintstones, that's the Flintstones. So when they pass a resolution, it's just a position statement, right? Because that's all a resolution is. A joint resolution passed by Congress is also a position taken by both House and Senate, and it's signed into law. But it's just a position, like this is Bon Jovi Day, okay? That's a joint resolution, right? Well, resolutions passed by the UN have no binding effect on the members unless the resolution is making specific reference to an international law. See, then it's binding, okay? Now, did you folks know that the United States, remember the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations? The United States was not a member of the United Nations, but it was a member of the United Nations. No, sorry. The United States was not a member of the League of Nations, but it was a member of the United Nations. Switzerland is a good example. They weren't a member of the United Nations until 2002. So you don't have to be in the United Nations to be a country, right? Because the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893, and if it still exists today, does not need to be a member of the UN to be a country. Well, it's a country on its own. It'll be its choice in the future with its government fully operating if it wants to join the United Nations, but that's another issue. As far as the Hawaiian Kingdom's existence, that's different. Now, some people may have heard about the family of nations. Folks heard of the family of nations, right? Some people think the UN is a family. No. The family of nations, the best way to explain it, the family of nations, it's like a pedigree of dogs called pit bulls. Yeah, you got the American pit bull, you got the razor's edge, you got the blue pit bull, right? Okay. All these pit bulls have one thing in common: blockheads. You can't tell a pit bull, right? And what do pit bulls do? They fight, right? In this family of nations, you actually have two states of affairs: a state of peace amongst pit bulls and a state of war that regulates the fighting. Okay? So when we talk about family of nations, we're only talking about pit bulls, not all nations of people, okay? Like the Choctaw, the Navajo, right? The Maile, our cousins down south. Every nation has the ability to become a pit bull called an independent state. So every independent state is a nation, but not every nation is an independent state. Because nation, by definition, is a common culture, history, and language. That's a nation. Okay? But a state is a country. And a country can be made up of many nations, like the United Kingdom. You got the Welsh, you got the Scottish, and you got the English. Before that was only England. Then it became the United Kingdom. Okay? So I'm just giving you some ideas of football. You guys following me?
Yes.
Okay? Football theory. Okay. So, before United States municipal laws, which are only applied to citizens and inhabitants of a state, meaning it's in its territory, there must be a treaty or some agreement between the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom, the country of my great-grandparents, where it joined it. It became a part of the United States. So, international law will explain how that can take place. Municipal law cannot, right? Because municipal law is limited to U.S. territory. So if it's limited to U.S. territory, how can it provide how you annex another country, right? So you need a treaty. So this is what international law says with regard to how one country or independent state joins another independent state. According to Professor Oppenheim, a leading expert on international law, he says cession of state territory, whenever you see state now, think of country. A cession of state territory is the transfer of sovereignty over state territory by the owner state to another state. And the only form in which a cession can be effected is an agreement embodied in a treaty between the ceding and the acquiring state. Something very similar to how somebody can convey property from one person to another. You have the grantor and the grantee. And what is the evidence of the transfer? The deed. Yeah? The warranty deed, right? Without the warranty deed, there's no title being transferred. One person cannot claim I got you. No, you gotta say how you got it, not what you're claiming. Same thing in international law. You need a transfer. So the word cession is to cede. That's where you get the term ceded lands, right? C-E-D-E, ceded lands, and C-E-D-E-D, okay, which is from cession. So basically what you got here is two sovereign entities. Sovereignty means authority. That's all it means, supreme authority over a territory. You have two sovereign entities called two countries with their governments that exercise that authority. One government will cede territory to another, either voluntary, they negotiate, or if they're fighting, pit bulls are fighting, in order to stop the fighting and turn it back into a peaceful situation, you're going to involuntarily cede your territory by a treaty or by some agreement, right? So that's how cession works. So let's take a look at the United States of America. The former 13 colonies of Great Britain, which became 13 independent states, is here on the East Coast right here. Okay. How did America get all of that? Would have to be cession, right? Has to be cession. So what is the first cession or ceded lands from a foreign country to the United States? Louisiana Purchase, 1803. Okay, so all lands west of the Mississippi River and adjacent to another country's territory was transferred to the United States in 1803. Okay? Now, prior to 1803, French municipal law would apply here. After 1803, American municipal law would apply here. What about this area here, Florida? What country? Spain, 1819. Treaty. Okay. What about the Pacific Northwest? Oregon, Washington, and a bit of Idaho. British, 1846. Russia was up north, Alaska, 1867. Treaties. And those were all voluntary cessions, right? This area here used to belong to Mexico. Transferred in 1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was a treaty of peace. Okay? And that's where all territory, Mexican territory, north of the Rio Grande River, and it has boundaries, and that river in the treaty begins at the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico. Okay? Some people say, oh, but Texas was annexed by a joint resolution of Congress in 1846. No, it wasn't. They just passed a law, we annexed Texas. No, you didn't. Well, you can say it, but it has no effect beyond the borders, right? If anything, what the joint resolution of 1846 purportedly annexing Texas, it sparked the Mexican-American War. 2 years later, 1848, you got the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now Mexico ceded all that territory. In each case, though, they paid. So the amount of payment for the Louisiana Purchase was about $14.5 million. Roughly the same amount Mexico received in this treaty from the United States, about $14.5 million. So it wasn't just taking, pillaging. No, they were actually negotiating. But you got a treaty. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, where's the authority of Hawaii's annexation? We obviously have to find a treaty, right? Well, July 7, 1898, joint resolution to provide for annexing the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. The problem here is that's a municipal law. It's not a treaty. Houston, we have a problem. We're coming down hot. Right? So that is nothing. It's just an American law purporting to have annexed a foreign country. It didn't. So we have to provide context here, yeah? So let's take a look at what the congressmen were saying when they were debating in 1898, 5 years after the overthrow of the Hawaiian government, annexing Hawaii. So here's the first guy, Thomas Ball. He's from Texas. Well, he should have said you can annex Hawaii by joint resolution because we were. No, because he knows you weren't. They weren't. So Thomas Ball says, the annexation of Hawaii, it's all on a congressional record. The annexation of Hawaii by joint resolution is unconstitutional, unnecessary, and unwise. That territory could only be constitutionally acquired by a treaty. He knows football. He's not talking basketball. Senator Augustus Bacon from Georgia, he says, the annexation of foreign territory was necessary and essentially the subject matter of a treaty, and that it could not be accomplished legally and constitutionally by a statute or a joint resolution. Now, a statute, as opposed to a joint resolution, is this. A statute is a bill that becomes an act, right? A joint resolution is a resolution approved by both House and Senate, signed by the President. Okay? But they're both municipal laws passed by the Congress. So Senator Augustus Bacon was making sure, even by a statute or an act, remember the Statehood Act? Remember the Territorial Act? Those were bills that became acts. But the Joint Resolution of Apology, 1993, that's a joint resolution, that's not an act. He said either one doesn't apply because only treaties apply. So that's the record. And here's a guy named Senator Allen from Nebraska. It's pretty upfront. He says on the record, the Constitution and the statutes are territorial in their operation, meaning they're limited to U.S. territory. That is, they can have no binding force or operation beyond the territorial limits of the government in which they are promulgated. In other words, the Constitution and statutes cannot reach across the territorial boundaries of the United States into the territorial domain of another government and affect that government or persons or property therein. Pretty much, that's football. Can't do it. Then he goes on to say, the joint resolution is ipso facto null and void. Wow, we're not even getting into whether or not you can annex a foreign country. This guy says it's void. You can't do it, period. It's not subject to debate. Okay? So they obviously knew, right? A little visual to represent what they said. There's Washington, D.C. You've got Congress. U.S. laws have, the United States has borders. U.S. laws have no force beyond the borders of the United States. It's not an argument. You don't have to try to argue with somebody. It does. No, it doesn't. Okay. We teach that in Poli-Sci 130, Political Science 130, Intro to American Politics. Donald Trump should have taken our classes. That guy is totally clueless on how government works. I'm not even talking about his decisions. I'm just saying this guy is nuts. So what does the United States Supreme Court say about municipal laws? Well, in 1824, it says the laws of no nation can justly extend beyond its own territories. They can have no force to control the sovereignty of any other nation. And in 1936, they reiterated that understanding. Neither the federal constitution nor the laws, which are congressional, passed in pursuit of it, have any force in foreign territory. Because it doesn't. Remember Senator Allen? It's ipso facto void. Right? And then they go on to say, and operations of the nation, the United States, in such territory must be governed by treaties, international understandings and compacts, and the principles of international law. So what you got here is the U.S. Constitution and laws, basketball. International law, football. What we've been doing is we've been looking at Hawaii's history, assuming we're part of the United States, so we're looking at it through the U.S. Constitution. And we're trying to fit Native Hawaiians into a box similar to Native Americans. Probably say, same color. Somewhat same culture. Or should I just say, not white? And that has nothing to do with anything. Wrong theory. And the word Hawaiian, under American law, when they passed the Hawaiian Homes Act, which is a municipal law in 1921, that definition of Hawaiian is blood quantum. 50% or more, then you can get benefits from that American law. But that's an American law. They reinvented the word. The word Hawaiian, under Hawaiian Kingdom law, the time of my great-grandparents, the time of Queen Neli'u, the time of this palace when it was running, Hawaiian is short for Hawaiian subject. It's a nationality, not an ethnicity. So you can be Haole and be Hawaiian. Just like British is short for British subject. You can be black and be American. American short for American citizen. You can be black and be British. You can be black and be Hawaiian. And you had examples of that in the past. So today we use those terms wrong. Again, we're playing basketball, right? So these are the things that apply to Hawaii. So what is Hawaii then? Well, Hawaii, according to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, because it's a legal statement here, not that it's the first time it came on, it's just a statement that is law. It's called a dictum, it's a term coming out of the decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom, it said, in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state, recognized as such by the United States, Great Britain, and various other states. So states are what? Countries. But all states, not all states, are independent. Right? Because you have the state of New York. That's not an independent state. The state of Georgia, right? But actually, the state of New York and the state of Georgia used to be independent. They actually were independent for 6 years, from 1783 to 1789. When King George III recognized the 13 former colonies as 13 independent states, what it meant was applying to municipal law. That when a country is independent, only their municipal law applies over their territory. independent of other municipal laws that applied to other territories. So from 1783 to 1789, New York only had one law over its territory called New York law, enacted by its legislature. But in 1789, these 13 independent states that were in a loose union called a confederation gave up their independence into a federal government. They maintained themselves as a state, but the independence was now in the United States of America. So now we have the United States municipal law that applies to all 49 states. Got that? All 49 states. Okay? And that word independent, people use it wrong today. Everybody's playing basketball. We want our independence. No, the question is or was Hawaii independent? Right? And the meaning of this, when it says the United States recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom, and it says Hawaiian Kingdom, not Kingdom of Hawaii, as an independent state, the consequence of that is that American citizens who are now in Hawaii can only be protected under Hawaiian Kingdom law, Hawaiian Kingdom municipal law, and they cannot get protection from American law because it's limited to U.S. territory. But you had states in the 19th century, like 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, states at the international level that were not independent, but they were states. Japan, Siam, which is Thailand, China. These states, Europe, the European powers did not recognize their independence, meaning Japanese law over Japanese territory, Chinese law over Chinese territory, because they said those laws do not apply to their citizens if they get in trouble in your territory. And if they do get in trouble in that Japanese territory, they can only be prosecuted under their country's laws. So that's an extension of municipal laws of the United States over the person, that national, the United States citizen in Japan. That means they did not recognize Japan's independence. Okay. Did you know the Hawaiian Kingdom had that same provision until January 18, 1893? There is no treaty that the Hawaiian Kingdom had with Japan that would allow Hawaiian Kingdom law to be applied over Hawaiian subjects who get into trouble in Japan. What Hawaii was affected by was what we call the most favored nation clause. Okay? Most favored nation clause in international treaties at that time meant what one country gives to one member of the family of nations gives to all. So, if all these other countries have these treaties that only their nationals can be prosecuted under their own law within Japanese territory, under the most favored nation clause, the Hawaiian Kingdom had that same right without even having a treaty. Make sense? And it was in 1881 that the Meiji Emperor had a meeting with King Kalakaua on his world tour, and they had a secret meeting, and the transcripts recently came out, I would say 25 years ago, which is quite recent because the meeting was 1881, right? Where the Meiji Emperor asked King Kalakaua, would you be the first power to recognize Japan's full independence? And he said, yeah, but by the time Kalakaua came home, he was trying to build the Confederation in the Pacific, which led to problems in 1887. But the person that carried it through was his sister, Queen Liliuokalani. They sent a dispatch to the Ambassador Irwin, the Hawaiian Kingdom ambassador in Tokyo. I think it was January 14th, 2 days before the invasion. It reached Japan on January 18th, and that's when Ambassador Irwin notifies the Japanese authorities, Hawaii is rescinding consular jurisdiction, which serves as the prosecution of Hawaiian subjects, the consulate. They served as the court. And Hawaii was the first. But the history books actually cite Great Britain as the first to have recognized Japan's independence in 1894. No, it was actually the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893. So you see all these little things when you start to understand football rules. Things just pop out at you, like wow, wow. In 1893, there were only 44 independent states. 44. Hawaii was one of them. By 1945, when the United Nations was formed as a successor to the League of Nations, there were 46. But today, there are a total of 197, and 193 of them are members of the UN. The original UN members were only 46. Today, it's 193. Those other countries became independent states through what is called self-determination, decolonization. Yeah. Now for us, we've been using self-determination. Native Hawaiians have a right to self-determination. Again, wrong, that's basketball. No, we already exercise self-determination. The Hawaiian Kingdom was built as a constitutional system under the principle of self-determination and equal rights. It's all in its constitution. The only time you have a right to exercise self-determination is if you were a colony and you didn't participate or allowed to participate in the colonizer's government. Then you can become decolonized, like India, Pakistan, right? Rwanda from Belgium. So for Hawaii, people say, we have a right to self-determination. Really? That means you're saying you have no equal rights. Well, you don't have equal rights because it's under an American illegal system. But you have equal rights under Hawaiian Kingdom law. Make sense? And you're going to see that as it all plays out in the presentation. Again, remember, football theory, not basketball. So have I provided you clear evidence that is indisputable that the Hawaiian Kingdom was an independent state? Was, right? And obviously nothing changed it because American municipal laws did not alter that. Right? So if it was an independent state in 1893, because this is what we have to understand what took place between the United States and Hawaii, then we have to use international law, right? And international law only applies to 14 countries. It doesn't apply to every nation of the world. 14 countries. Christopher Greenwood, former judge of the International Court of Justice, states that traditional international law, a law between nations, was based upon a rigid distinction between a state of peace and a state of war. You were either in a state of peace or in a state of war. There was no middle ground, right? So when the pit bull bites, war. That doesn't mean the pit bull killed. And international law regulates the fight, okay? Now this idea of a state of peace and a state of war, Hawaiians could understand it because that's ancient. In the ancient days, during the time of Kamehameha I, what was a state of peace? Makahiki. Who was the god of peace? Lono. What about war? Ku kailimoku, right? And Ku returns after Lono left, right? So for Hawaiians, they actually developed very similar to the medieval Middle Ages of Europe. The commonality between both was military. So we could understand what's going on. Even during war, in international law, you have what is called neutrality, right? A neutral state. And you cannot fight in a neutral state. And if a belligerent enters a neutral state, they have to disarm, do their thing, like in Switzerland, leave, rearm, go back fighting. Well, that sounds something very similar to City of Refuge, right? So there's a lot of similarities. And I think that's the reason why the Hawaiian Kingdom was able to evolve as fast as it did in light of international rules that drew from the Middle Ages. Actually, the idea of the state and international law actually began in 1648, Treaty of Westphalia. That's sort of the beginning, right? Now, the state of peace and a state of war, two state of affairs, is also reflected in this guy Oppenheim, Professor Oppenheim, who's an authority on international law. So treaties means an authority, an authoritative publication. Volume 1, peace. Volume 2, war and neutrality. So you have certain rules during peace, and you have certain rules during war. The Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state was in that system. That's why we need to understand what the system was before we can even attempt to understand why they did what they did. in 1893 on both sides, right? So there are basically 4 stages of war in international law. First, there is the act of war. That triggers state of war. A pit bull bites, something hostile. Okay, it's called an act of war by definition in international law. Okay? Then it goes to the second stage, from fighting to a surrender. Now, to surrender does not mean you transform the situation to a state of peace. It's still in a state of war. It's just you're not fighting. And that stage is followed by occupation, belligerent occupation. That's when they implement the Treaty of Surrender. And then from the then from the occupation, it then moves to the final stage called the Treaty of Peace. Then it goes back to state of peace. So, an example, contemporary example that we can relate to, December 7, 1941, act of war. Japan bit, the pit bull of Japan bit the pit bull of United States forces here in Hawaii. That triggered state of war. 1945, surrender. 1945, surrender. Treaty of Surrender signed on the USS Missouri in Japan. Missouri, USS Missouri is in Pearl Harbor right now. Okay? General MacArthur was there. After the treaty was signed, Japan was occupied. General MacArthur was the military governor of the Japanese infrastructure who administered Japanese municipal law. He did not introduce American municipal law because Japan was still independent. It just didn't have a government. And that's the whole purpose of the law of occupation. It regulates the occupier and the one who overthrew the government to now be that temporary government. And then a treaty of peace was signed in San Francisco in 1951. Amongst all the countries that were at war with Japan. And it took effect in 1952. When it took effect, the occupation ended. It went back to a state of peace. A lot of people don't know that America was at war with Japan from 1941 to 1952. Not from 1941 to 1945, right? That was just the hostility going on, okay? So keep in mind, these 4 stages apply in all cases under international law. So we're gonna see how it applies to Hawaii. You're gonna see these 4 stages play out. Yeah? Okay. So President Cleveland, 11 years after the overthrow of the government of Queen Lili'uokalani, a constitutional monarchy, he had initiated an investigation in March of 1893, okay, where he sent James Blunt as special commissioner to Hawaii, who began his investigation on April 1st. Okay? From April 1st until July 17th, James Blunt was sending periodic reports to the Secretary of State, Walter Gresham. Okay? And these reports in our history book has come to be known as the Blunt reports. Okay? Plural, not Blunt report. Periodic reports. The final report, July 17th. Then on October 18th, 1893, Walter Gresham, the Secretary of State, made a conclusion and a recommendation to the President. He said Hawaii's government was overthrown under threat of war, physical war. He's using those terms. Then he basically said, we need to repair it. And then he apprised the President of that report, and the President then came out on December 18, 1893, with a message to Congress. This is what happened. Now, once the President speaks, it is dispositive. Dispositive means you can't alter it. It's settled, because the President is the head of state of the United States. And the only person that could override President Cleveland's report would have to be a successive president, another president, who did another report to counter it. There is none, right? The President, as the chief executive, came out with his decision. So let's take a look at what he said. In light of what you folks have begun to learn, football theory. Okay. So President Cleveland says to Congress, on the 16th day of January, 1893, between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a detachment of Marines from the United States steamer Boston with 2 pieces of artillery landed at Honolulu. The men, upwards of 160 in all, were supplied with double cartridge belts filled with ammunition and with haversacks and canteens, and were accompanied by a hospital corps with stretchers and medical supplies. What do you think the Marines are about to do? They're ready to engage. That's what it is. You got a hospital corps coming with stretchers, anticipating casualties, right? But it's not what we think. What does President Cleveland think? And this is what President Cleveland said. This military demonstration upon the soil of Honolulu was of itself an act of war. Right here, he just acknowledged the U.S. pit bull just bit the Hawaii Kingdom. Act of war, right? What he did was he acknowledged that the state of war was triggered. And those rules apply. Not laws during peace, but during war. This led to the following day's surrender by Queen Liliuokalani, the conditional surrender. And hear what she says. She is referencing to military action. I, Liliuokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom. See, they say Hawaiian Kingdom, not Kingdom of Hawaii. Right. Queen, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional or temporary government of and for this kingdom. That I yield to the superior force of the United States, he's referring to the Marines, whose Minister Plenipotentiary, the U.S. Ambassador, His Excellency John Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the provisional government. So right there what you have is intervention. A foreign state came in, it popped up an insurgency, and they're protecting them. Right? The Queen then concluded, now to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, under the action of its representatives, and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign of the Hawaiian Islands. What she's basically saying is, surrender, conditional. And all I'm doing is yielding my authority called executive power to arrest these people. She's not yielding the country. She's not yielding the legislative branch, the judicial branch. She's not yielding Hawaiian subjects and their rights. It's her authority that she is yielding, and that's important. Right? So, would you consider this an overthrow? No, it's not really an overthrow. It's more like an unlawful taking of a government. Because when you say overthrow, that also implies you're replacing the government. Actually, the only thing that happened here was the Queen and her cabinet and Marshal Charles Wilson, head of the police force, were removed, replaced by insurgents, and everyone in government stayed the same. They signed oaths of allegiance to the new regime under threat of the U.S. military. And that is where that song, Maile Alohaina, what we know as Kaulananapua, comes from. Maile Alohaina, the patriot song. One of the lyrics, which is in Hawaiian, in English, it's translated as, do not sign the paper of the enemy, meaning the oath of allegiance. Do not sign the paper of the enemy with its sin of annexation and loss of civil rights. It's very much hitting the nail on the head with what's actually going on, right? Now, President Cleveland then further stated, this wrongful recognition by our minister or our ambassador placed the government of the Queen in a position of most perilous perplexity. Pretty interesting how the use of that word, perilous perplexity. Yeah, it was going to be bloodshed. Good thing we had a woman in charge. She was thinking. On the one hand, she had the possession of the palace, of the barracks, and of the police station, and had at her command at least 500 fully armed men and several pieces of artillery. Doesn't that sound kind of military? Indeed, the whole military force of her kingdom was on her side and at her disposal. In this state of things, if the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents alone, her course would have been plain and the result unmistakable. Another thing that we tend to do is we keep saying, which is not true, that those who supposedly overthrew the government were American businessmen. It's not true, they're insurgents. Cleveland never said they're businessmen. You say it now. The apology resolution says businessmen. They weren't. They're traitors. What do you do with insurgents? You arrest them, prosecute them, convict them, and hang them. No, because it's in the law. That's a capital crime this way. Insurgency. That's not a good thing to be called. You don't want to be called an insurgent. Right? And then Cleveland continues, but the United States had allied itself with her enemies, Hawaiian Kingdom's enemies, had recognized them as a true government of Hawaii, and had put the Queen and her adherents in the position of opposition against lawful authority, because now they're being protected by the United States. That's what put the Queen in a position, because the Queen could have easily taken them out. And he's acknowledging that. She knew that she could not withstand the power of the United States, but she believed that she might safely trust to its justice. So what did President Cleveland say regarding the Hawaiian Kingdom's government? Not the Hawaiian Kingdom state, because that still exists, right? The government. In his message, he said, the government of the Queen, which is constitutional, was both undisputed and was both the de facto, in fact, and de jure lawful government. What did he say about the insurgents? When our minister recognized the provisional government, the only basis upon which it rested was the fact that the Committee of Safety had in the manner above declared it to exist. It was neither a government de facto nor de jure, because they're insurgents. Remember, he cited them being insurgent. You can't be a lawful government and an insurgent at the same time. So clearly the provisional government was comprised of insurgents. And did you know Native Hawaiians was a part of the insurgency? Well, this was not white against brown. Okay, you had a lot of racist remarks going back and forth, but you got some natives that was part of the treasonous activities of others. So you have to keep that in mind. It's an issue of a country and allegiance, not an issue of who's more native than native, sort of like what we have today. You know there's three types of Native Hawaiians up today. You got those that are less than 50%, can't get Hawaiian homes. You get those that are more than 50%, you can't get Hawaiian homes. And then you got those Native Hawaiians that are 200%. Hey, Hawaiian, take it easy. That's the Hawaiian trying to prove they're Hawaiian. Hey, Hawaiian, take it easy. Confusion, right? Basketball. See, I have to crack a joke. You guys look like you guys are taking this too seriously.
Too serious.
And then President Cleveland concluded, by an act of war with the participation of a diplomatic representative of the United States and without authority of Congress, the government of a feeble, that's not derogatory when you say feeble. Feeble is not a major power, yeah, militarily. But a feeble, but friendly and confiding people has been overthrown by an act of war. So act of war, invasion, by an act of war, overthrow of the government or seizure of the government, right? These admitted acts of war triggered state of war, called international humanitarian law. And in order to transform the situation back to a state of peace, you need a treaty of peace. We don't have a treaty of peace. We've got a joint resolution of annexation limited to U.S. territory, which Senator Allen said was ipso facto void. What we have we're actually in the third stage, occupation. Yeah, occupation since January 17, 1893. The problem is, the United States did not comply with the law of occupation, but Hawaii was occupying. That's called belligerent occupation. An interesting note, some people say, Keanu, how did you come to this thing? Because nobody else came to this understanding of. It's not like I was mentored by a professor that I learned from. My professors are all dead. This kupuna, it's called in the archives. It's called read the documents. But the one thing that I had, where I could understand it in a very different way, and it's the truth. So in 1990, I was at that time in the Hawaii Army National Guard Field Artillery, 1st of the 487 Field Artillery. I was in 1990 at Officers Advanced Course in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, during the Gulf conflict, the first Gulf War, 1990, right? We were getting direct intel into our classes because we were preparing for battle planning. So advanced course, as captains, you're actually battle planning. officer's basic course for lieutenants, you're actually learning how to fire the weapon, the guns. You're learning the gunnery skills and all tactics, strategy. The captain level, advanced course, you're learning battle planning, right? So we would get live information coming in, preparing us, because some of us would be activated to go directly into Desert Storm. At that time it was Desert Shield, right? So we're getting all this stuff. One thing that I learned, and I knew, just from a military standpoint, which I found later was similar to Hawaii. So I knew that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, right? Invaded Kuwait, overthrew its government, right? We knew that Kuwait still existed as a country, and that situation is occupation, right? So even though we overthrew the government, we knew from a military standpoint, Kuwait still exists. And rights are being violated because Iraq was not administering Kuwaiti law. Iraq was imposing Iraqi law. Yeah? Because what happened was they eventually unilaterally said Kuwait is ours. Yeah, that's what they said from Baghdad, right? And then for 7.5 months they were occupied illegally and then ultimately expelled when Desert Storm was initiated, General Schwarzkopf, right? I didn't realize it until I was looking at Hawaii's history later, in 1994. Did you know that the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, actually there was an insurgency that was put up, and they were disguising themselves to be Kuwaitis, when in fact they were Iraqi nationals. And they called themselves the Provisional Government of Kuwait. I'm serious, I'm not even making this stuff up. And then they later changed their name to the Republic of Kuwait. And they asked Iraq to annex them. And then they annexed them and it became a province of of Iraq. I am not lying. And I remember vaguely, because when I got home after advanced course, I was working at the Queen Lilipo Clinic Children's Center as a social worker. So I'm monitoring the news because I don't know if we're going to get activated, right? So I'm following it. If Desert Shield is going to turn into Desert Storm and we might have to be deployed. Just like how guard units have been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan for the war, right? So I'm watching the news, and I remember watching an interview by Bernard Shaw, okay, from CNN. He had an interview with Saddam Hussein in Baghdad. Big news. And he actually asked Saddam Hussein, because I'm watching this, 1990, what do you feel about that you have to leave Kuwait or risk the retaliation of the Allied forces? And he says something along the lines of, I'll get out of Kuwait when the United States gets out of Hawaii. What? What does Hawaii have to do with this? 1990. This is even before the apology resolution, 1993. And I was like, what? And then when I started to see the names, I'm like, oh, this guy got the blueprint from somebody or some entity. I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying things that make you go, Now, did you know that after Iraq was expelled from Kuwait, right, they had to give compensation to all those whose rights were violated because Iraq did not administer Kuwaiti law. They were administering Iraqi law. So the United States led the coalition forces to form a United Nations Claims Commission under the UN Security Council for reparations. So they had to lay out claims that people can submit, private people, companies, and governments, if their rights were violated, meaning the rights under the laws of war, by Iraq. 2014, I believe, came up with the final payment. There were 1.5 million successful claims that they investigated. What they came up with was $54 billion, collectively, for 7.5 months of occupation. Let's kind of take that to Hawaii and apply 126 years. Did you know that would get roughly $11 trillion for reparations? And we have a precedent called the the UN Compensation Commission. I actually had that as part of my dissertation. So all of a sudden, when you start to look at it through football rules, you start to look at how other football games are played, similar to ours, I go, oh, wow. Before that, everybody's trying to be more native than native. When in reality, This is a legal issue, right? And there's precedents out there. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Kind of trippy, huh? So, remember the state called state sovereignty, the country? 1843, Great Britain recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. Queen Victoria, just like how King George III recognized New York as an independent state. But that sovereign entity, the country, its authority is exercised by the Hawaiian Kingdom government, constitutional monarchy, very progressive. Hawaii had universal health care, free health care for Native Hawaiians. That's what Queen's Hospital is all about. Yeah, free. It's not a handout, it was part of the system. Did you know the Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden, they always talk about them having free health care, right? Did you know that only started after World War II? The Hawaiian Kingdom was the only country in the world that actually had it in the 1800s. Compulsory education. The Hawaiian Kingdom had compulsory education 70 years before the United States had compulsory education. Literacy in the Hawaiian Kingdom, pretty much everyone could read and write. Very progressive. Now you compare that today, oh, the exact opposite. Highest incarceration in jail, highest substance abuse, highest spouse abuse. I mean, it's like Native Hawaiians became strangers in their own country because we're led to believe something that's not true. We're going to get into that. But do not judge the Hawaiian Kingdom with what you perceive today. Okay? This is basketball. This is football. Now, even though the United States government illegally overthrew the Hawaiian Kingdom government, which they admitted, that did not mean the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state. It still exists. It wasn't terminated. So what you have to keep in mind, these terms, municipal law, insurgents, state, government, right? Because these are the terms that will help us understand not just what happened, but how to fix the problem, right? How to fix the problem. So the laws of war, in 1893, some people say, well, those laws don't apply anymore. No. The laws of war back then was considered customary, meaning all the 44 countries accepted as binding. Okay, that's customary. Now what they did was they took the customary aspect of it. So number one rule in international law, the law of occupation, is to administer the laws of the occupied state. That's number one rule, right? Now, in 1899, there was a conference that was held in the Netherlands, in The Hague, where majority of those countries got together and all signed onto a treaty called the Hague Convention. Now the Hague Convention, number 2, applied to the laws of war. The Hague Convention number 1 in 1899 is what formed the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration was the first thing to be addressed by these countries, because if you're going to war and you have a dispute, instead of biting each other, go to arbitration. That's the reason why the Permanent Court of Arbitration was formed, under the Hague Convention number 1. But if you can't resolve your dispute and you're going to war, then Hague Convention number 2 is going to apply. This is how it's regulated. So you know that customary law, you must administer the laws of the occupied state. From 1899 on, what you refer to now is Article 43. Instead of saying, you must administer the laws of the occupied state. That's why it's a codification of existing laws that existed previous to the convention. Does it make sense? It's not new law, that's the main thing. Because a lot of people will say, well, 1899, that's 6 years after 1893. No, that's an amateur response. A person who knows it says 1899 is the codification of what was the law in 1893. Okay, that's important. Then in 1907, they superseded the 1899 Hague Convention with the 1907 Hague Convention, number 4. And that has Article 43 in there as well. So Article 43 of the Hague Convention number 4 obligates the occupying state to administer the laws of the occupied state. That is the fundamental rule. Remember the term independence, an independent state? This is explicit recognition of that independence of that state, because even though you overthrew the government, it's still independent. Its municipal laws are still applicable. The problem is a new government has stepped in who now has to administer it until they get a treaty of peace, which could transfer everything, like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right, 1848, or it could just end the war, and then you move toward reparations. Well, reparations are included in the Treaty of Peace. Now, according to Sassoli, he's a renowned jurist on the Hague Convention, he says, Article 43 does not confer on the occupying power any sovereignty over the occupied territory. The occupant may therefore not extend its own legislation over the occupied territory, nor act as a sovereign legislator. But that's exactly what the United States did, right? But by doing that, did not negate Article 43. It's just evidence of violating Article 43. That's all it did. Right? Then it goes on to say, the expression in Article 43, the laws in force in the country, refers not only to the laws in the strict sense of the word, but also to the Constitution, decrees, ordinances, court precedents, as well as administrative regulations and executive orders. So it's not just the civil code and the criminal code. It's court decisions. It's administrative policies. It's everything called the legal order, right? The Great Maile, the Juliana Act, history rights, all these things are part of that legal system. So what our people don't know today, most of them don't even know what are Hawaiian laws, other than, oh, it's supposed to be Hawaiian law. No, you gotta know everything. But see, that's what our kupuna knew, because that was their system, right? Today we're just kind of reawakening to that. But we don't even know what that system really is, because we're still looking at it, whether we like it or not, through American eyes. And America is not a monarchy. And it's not a constitutional monarchy. It's a republic. Very different, right? So that's a lot of education that we have to go through. So on January 17, 1893, the Hawaiian Kingdom came under belligerent occupation. Does that make sense now, after I explained football theory? The law of occupation mandates the occupier to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law. Never changed. According to Judge Crawford, remember the separation of state from government? Judge Crawford from the International Court of Justice says, belligerent occupation does not affect the continuity of the state, even when there exists no government claiming to represent the occupied state. So international law actually protected the Hawaiian Kingdom as a country without us even knowing anything for the past 126 years. It's still there. And all we gotta do is wake up to understand that. Not that we gotta change anything. This is just maka'ala. Maka'ala in Hawaiian is open your eyes. Prior to this, we was all makapo, blind. And sometimes when we open the eye, too much light, too scary. Oh, turn off the light, turn off the light. You see all the rats. I was wondering what was crawling all over my foot. Too late, lights on. Just get used to it. So, why is it that we don't know any of this stuff? Because when I'm talking about the Hawaiian Kingdom, it's history. I'm only talking about 2 generations. I'm talking about my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather was 13 years old in 1893. Yeah? How come I don't know anything from him? I don't know anything about the Hawaiian Kingdom. What happened in 2 generations? Something happened to get us to where we are now, right? Something triggered it. Something was maintained. Well, here's this guy, Samuel Damon. He's an insurgent, 1895. On the record of the Republic of Hawaii minutes of their so-called Grand Poobah and the Walla Buffalo Lodge. Okay? So it's Hawaii's first sovereignty group. Just declare yourself to exist. If we are ever to have peace and annexation, the first thing to do is to obliterate the past. Think about that. Obliterate the past. Well, that's an opinion. That's an opinion from this guy. But I've met many people who have opinions. Everybody has their own opinion. That's an opinion. What I want to know is, when was this opinion, when did it turn into a policy and implement it? See, then I can measure it. Yeah? Obliterate. I can know. What do you mean by obliterate? What's the means by which you obliterate? So, basically, let's use this example. My name is Vladimir. I just took over Hawaii and I got 10,000 Russian troops out here, right? Can I get all of you to believe you're Russian? Well, some of you will end up saying, "Da." Why? Because I got a military force there, and it's called survival. But really, I didn't change anything in your mind. I'm just strengthening you, right? So I cannot change you into Russians. I cannot have you speak comfortably in Russian. I cannot have you know Russian history, right? Correct, yeah? Right? But who can I get to believe they're Russian? Children, your children. Because I just took over the entire system. I'm going to take over the schools. I am going to implement that policy. Yeah? It's called denationalization. Denationalization, okay, is a war crime under the laws of war. In the United States, in World War II and World War I, the Germans were doing it. It's called Germanization in occupied territories. They were taking over the schools, and where they only had 5 years, 4 or 5 years to try to implement and be successful. Here we have 126 years.
It sounds like this guy has so much hate.
So who's this guy, Samuel Damon? In 1895. In 1895. He was a trustee of Kamehameha Schools. Kamehameha Schools became the flagship of brainwashing. All the trustees were all insurgents. Charles Reed Bishop was an insurgent. Yeah, we got evidence of that. I got it from the archives already. It's already out. He was actually with the provisional government, so-called insurgent, provisional government in Washington, D.C. in February of 1893. I got letters signed by Lauren Thurston notifying Dole, the other insurgent, that Charles Reed Bishop fully supports what we did in Honolulu and what we're trying to do in Washington, D.C. That's pretty damning. Mott Smith, the ambassador, February of 1893, sends a letter to Dole saying that the assistance of Charles Reed Bishop was phenomenal. But yet you don't see Charles Reed Bishop saying anything. It's like he was hiding. A lot of snakes in the grass. And what we're talking about is insurgency. And I'm a Kamehameha grad, and there's something called Founders Day. Whoa. we're praising an insurgent. One of the buildings, upper campus Kamehameha, is called Smith Hall, named after William O. Smith, the insurgent that was the so-called Attorney General. So all of a sudden, so we're not immune from being affected by this information, right? But we all get affected by it. And a lot of times it gets emotional. A lot of my classmates say, "No, can I be? Can." Then I got to show the people, "No way." I said, "I'm not trying to prove a point. I'm just trying to show you something. And this is just everything. It's indicative of everything. Our entire world is flipping. That's what it is. And all I say is get used to it, because it's going to keep flipping." So denationalization, by definition, is to obliterate the national consciousness of the occupied state. It's deliberate. So when did they carry out that opinion or statement into a policy? Oops. 1906. Program for Patriotic Exercises, Territory of Hawaii, adopted by the Department of Public Instruction, DOE. The theme of the program was to brainwash the children of Hawaii to be American and to speak English. Now they're going to get every child to say "da." Russian. They're going to start referring back to, Stalin, part of our history. Americanization. 1906. This is my tutu generation. This is my great-grandfather's daughter. Right? Now, Harper's Weekly magazine from New York came to Hawaii to do a story on the implementation of that policy. And they visited 3 schools: Ka'iolani Public School, which was grades 1 through 8, Ka'ahumanu Public School, grade 1 through 8, and Honolulu High School, before the name was changed to President William McKinley High School in 1911, part of the propaganda. President Theodore Roosevelt High School, Abraham Lincoln Elementary, Thomas Jefferson. You start to see what's happening. It's all over. So they visited Ka'iolani Public School, and Harper's Weekly Magazine, the reporter, documents it. And he says, at the command of the principal, 714 school children stand at attention, and they're ordered to march. And he's impressed with how much rhythm is there. They're coalescing. They're marching like, wow, this is impressive. When I was in the Army, I've seen men with 2 left feet kind of march. You got children marching, grades 1 through 8. Then at the command of the principal, they stand at attention and they salute the flag. Look like that. Look like it, look. That's actually the civilian salute from Rome. Mussolini and Hitler hijacked it. After that, the United States went like this. Prior to that, was like this, across the United States. So, here's the picture from Harper's Weekly Magazine at Ka'iolani Public School. This is my tutu generation. Then at the command of the principal, they all yelled in unison, we give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag. Duh. This scene shows a salute to the American flag, which flies on the grounds of the Ka'iolani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. Inculcate. That's called repetition. It's called brainwashing. Inculcate is synonymous with brainwashing. You can look it up. This is my tutu's generation. She knew nothing in school about the Hawaiian Kingdom. Everything was American. And if you don't speak English and you speak Hawaiian, you get beaten. And we hear those stories of kupuna getting hit, with the rod or with the fit, with the hand, whatever it was. By the time this indoctrination, this brainwashing got to my parent, my dad in 1939 when he was born, he went to St. Louis. Out of sight, out of mind. It's already institutionalized. By the time it got to me, when I went to Kamehameha schools in 1978 to 1982 when I graduated, I was blank. I didn't know anything. In fact, I went to a military college after high school to be an officer at New Mexico Military Institute. I had no idea it was an occupier's army. And plenty of Hawaiians served in the military. Kind of amazing, when you kind of see this thing transpiring. But this is why we don't know. See, because now it's okay for not knowing. Now it's okay, but it's not okay to continue not knowing. Because now you know. And I'm not one to say stand up and hold signs. No, I'm just saying get educated. Start talking amongst your family, right? Normalize the conversation. War crimes are for real, right? Things like this really happen. Then in 1976, there was a book that went out, a teacher's manual from the DOE, Department of Education, The Americanization of Hawaii, 1776 to 1976. They're even using Americanization. But for us, if we were there in 1976, we would not even blink an eye on that. Because we've been so desensitized. It's been so normalized, this is America. But imagine 1976, this, and my great-grandfather from 1893 is looking at it, he would be shocked to hell. But us, no shock. It's normal. This is America. Here we have the Nuremberg trials, 1945. This is the indictment. United States of America, the French, the British, and the Soviets versus Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess, all the Nazis, right? Count 3, war crimes. Germanization of occupied territories. Eerily similar to what happened here, where they had 5 years to try to accomplish what they couldn't accomplish. We're going on 126 years. in certain occupied territories, purportedly annexed, because even Germany was just unilaterally annexing Luxembourg. We got you. They didn't change anything, but they became occupied. In certain occupied territories, purportedly annexed to Germany, the defendants, the Nazis, not Germans, the Nazis, methodically and pursuant to plan, endeavored to assimilate those territories politically, culturally, and socially, and economically into the German Reich. The defendants endeavored to obliterate the former national character of these territories. This plan included economic domination, physical conquest, installation of puppet governments, purported lawful annexation, and enforced conscription or drafting into the German armed forces. This was carried out in most of the occupied countries, including Norway, France, Luxembourg, Soviet Union, Denmark, Belgium, and Holland. That is pretty much what happened to Hawaii. Native Hawaiians, or Hawaiian subjects, majority of native, were all drafted starting World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Those are all war crimes. That's what the Germans had to answer to. And they were found guilty, the Nazis. So our similarities to our situation is not in the Pacific, as we're trying to find that cultural component, right? Similarities to Hawaii is Europe. It's all in Europe, because that's where independent states were, and Hawaii was a member of the Family of Nations. We have treaties with all these countries, right? You might say we've been barking up the wrong tree. Are we barking up the wrong tree? We go, whoa, now everything's falling out. 90 years later, 1988, in Washington, D.C., the United States Department of Justice uncovers this situation of, I don't think Hawaii was annexed. Remember municipal law? How the rules apply? So they basically stumbled over Hawaii's situation in their legal opinion. It's called the Office of Legal Counsel. It was an advice, a legal opinion given to the Department of State that addressed international law as opposed to municipal law. So in that decision, or in that opinion, it says, despite the constitutional objections, remember Senator Allen, Representative Ball, Senator Bacon, despite those objections, Congress approved the joint resolution and President McKinley signed the measure in 1898. The opinion goes on to say, nevertheless, whether this action demonstrates the constitutional power of Congress to acquire territory is certainly questionable. Because we have 118 military bases over here. This is headquarters for the Pacific Command. This is when it's going, whoa, whoa, whoa. But what did they conclude? Therefore, it is unclear which constitutional power Congress exercised when it acquired Hawaii by joint resolution. Because even they got stumped. And they're not even Hawaiians. It's an American doing his job to advise the State Department on what not to do. Crazy, huh? Then what I find interesting is 5 years later, in 1993, the same joint resolution of apology kicks in. Now they turn the focus onto Native Hawaiians, self-determination, similar to Native Americans. It's called the red herring. And everybody is kind of went that way. For Hawaiians, a red herring is the triggerfish. Yeah. Grab the triggerfish and throw it. Whoa. Well, turn this way. Did you know David Copperfield? You know how David Copperfield in Waikiki made Diamond Head disappear? He's a good magician. He was on a stage, and he said, everybody see Diamond Head? Yep. And he pulled the shades, and then what people didn't know was all he did was move the stage to the right. So when he opened it up, Diamond Head disappeared. And then what I'm saying is, brother, turn the stage back over here. It never left. It's all an illusion. That's the red herring. Look over there. Did you know the best place to hide something is right in front of you? Did you know the governmental infrastructure of the state of Hawaii? It's actually the Hawaiian Kingdom. Yeah, the infrastructure. The gubernatorial districts, the legislature, the executive branch, all from the Kingdom era. The Bureau of Conveyances, where deeds are recorded in the Department of Land and Natural Resources, that was actually formed in 1845 in the Department of Interior, not Department of Land and Natural Resources. The only thing that's the Sheriff's Department, Kingdom era. Judges, everything is from the Kingdom era. All the public schools from the Kingdom era. Most of the ILH private schools are from the Kingdom era. St. Louis, 1846, was called St. Louis College. Iolani, 1870s. Punahou, 1830s. Niptak is Kauai House Seminary, right? Wow, it's like, when you look at it that way, it's right here. The only thing that happened to the Hawaiian infrastructure is like, look at it like, Hawaii was one of the 44 planes that were flying in the air. Yeah? High sovereignty, right? Ultimate. You got Hawaiian Airlines, you got American Airlines, you got British Airways, all the different countries. The only thing that happened to our airlines is it got hijacked. Where they removed the Queen and her cabinet from the cockpit, replaced it with insurgents, put the Marines in front of them, protected them, right? Painted the plane red, white, and blue, and released sleeping gas, called denationalization. And everybody just slowly fell asleep. So you got the flight attendant walking by. Speak English. American. I am speaking English. And then the sleeping gas wore off. And I gotta admit, I think I was the first one that woke up in 1994. When I woke up in seat 27E, I'm going, everybody's still sleeping. I'm looking outside, I see all the other planes flying. I said, what the, where am I? Thought I had a bad nightmare. I thought this was the state of Hawaii. I realized, uh-oh, we just got taken over. It's happened. My focus is on that pilot. See, the reason why I'm focusing on that pilot, because I don't want this plane to do a nosedive economically and politically. So now I'm going, ooh, we gotta play this one careful. And we decided to address that situation by slowly waking people up and pointing to the pilot. And I'm trying to tell them, shh, don't get worked up. No, some Hawaiians waking up, they start snapping, hey bro, go back to sleep. You're getting all grouchy, right? Wake up. But it's a real situation with real ramifications. So here's this imagery of the change. So the Hawaiian Kingdom had the 3 branches of government, very progressive. The monarch was the chief executive, the country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. The only thing that changed was names. From the Hawaiian Kingdom to the provisional government, from provisional government to the republic, from republic to territory, from territory to state. It's all still here. Never changed. This novelist wrote, which I really like to quote, when a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous and its speaker a raving lunatic. Did you know when I woke up, everybody thought I was a lunatic? I'm serious. Go Google Keanu site. Oh yeah, people was calling me all kind of names, right? Well, what's funny is, one of my doctoral students actually found a video by Namako Kaina called Hawaiian Kingdom Law with Keanu Sai, 1998, right? And it was filmed at the Queen Liliuokalani Children's Center in Hilo. It was like 4.5 hours. So he told me, he called me and said, Keanu, I have to go borrow it from Sinclair, audio and visual, right? So he borrowed it, he watched it, he calls me back, he goes, bro, you're saying the same thing. The only difference is you got 3 letters after your name, PhD. I said, well, back then, all we had was overhead and transparencies. 1998. Today we get PowerPoint. Yeah. But that's the truth, and it's all now starting to come up. So in 1994, I woke up, and I realized I was in the wrong army. So I moved to get retired. Retirement after 10 years. I have retirement points up to 10 years, not the full 20. And I can't collect it until I'm 60.
Wow.
But I have to leave. I gotta move on this. I know too much now. So I even talked to my commander, Colonel Parkman, and I said, Colonel, you're not gonna believe what I'm finding. And he was a professor at the University of Hawaii. And he said, no, I can see what you're looking at. I go, you know what? I gotta get out. I gotta retire. So I got on, and he said, good. It wasn't, I didn't leave on bad terms. So I was honorably discharged. And then I started to think about what are we gonna do with this information? You know, you naturally get to the, now what? Right? Now what? Going around looking at everybody, I think I'm a freaking lunatic. Coming out and saying Hawaiian Kingdom law still applies, you know? So what we did was, we're gonna test it head on. Because I'm military, I'm very conservative, you know? I'm not a liberal kind of guy. I don't push the envelope. I'm so in the box, everybody's out of the box. I'm serious, I cite regulations. I say this is how it works. I'm not saying this is what you should do, I'm saying this is what you didn't do. And everybody just didn't like what I was saying. But somehow they wanted to put me in the activist group of pushing the envelope. No, I just said, this is what it is. So I needed to come up with something to test. I gotta test this theory that always occupied. Because right now I can't deny it, but it's only me. So I got together with a friend of mine who used to be with Locations Inc., Don Lewis. And I said, hey, always occupied, we gotta follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. Yeah, this is what we're gonna do. So we came up with this plan. We're gonna form a company called Perfect Title Company. Perfect Title Company, not perfect, because nobody got perfect title. Now, why are we gonna create Perfect Title Company? Because we're gonna show you how you have a defective title, but you gotta perfect it under Hawaiian Kingdom law, okay? And we had to create a company under Hawaiian Kingdom law, so we created under the 1880 co-partnership statute, which says you can make an you can create articles of agreement for the partnership and record it in the Bureau of Conveyances. So we basically went to the Bureau of Conveyances and we saw the templates of how other companies work back in the 1800s, right? So we just followed it and we got it recorded. And then we're going on and telling people, you don't own your land. How's that? You create a company for people to buy your title report to tell them you don't own your land. It wasn't really that way. The reason why we could say there's a defect in title, because a consequence of 1893 and the illegal overthrow of its government. Who owns land over here? Anybody own land? You guys don't own land. Nobody owns land.
Still waiting.
Okay, still waiting. That's not even owning, that's leasing. Okay, so you own land, right? Okay. How did you get the title? But you got it from a deed, right, or something? You got something written?
Yes.
Something recorded that it's in your name for $1 in love or something. Normally family members, no money exchange, but $1 in love or something like that. But you need a deed, right? A deed to transfer property. It's called a warranty deed. What do you have aside from the person signing the deed? You have an official from the state of Hawaii. A notary. You have a notary, right? So the notary's job is to ensure that the person conveying the property is of sound mind and body. He's not being threatened, he's not drunk. That's the whole point of a notary. They're acknowledging the transfer, right? State of Hawaii, notary. Where did that authority come for that notary of the state of Hawaii? State of Hawaii law, right? Where did state of Hawaii law come from? Congress. What is Congress with regard to the state of Hawaii? It's a municipal law, limited to U.S. territory. Guess what? That is not a real notary. That's a defect in title. That's a problem. Now, when you borrow money from a bank, this is where we were coming from the commercial side. Does money talk? Bullshit walks. We're going to apply this. I'm not going to teach history. I'm going to apply history. Anybody here? Well, you guys are right now. Okay. Anybody here with a mortgage? You have a mortgage? Okay. Only one. Okay. Well, okay. So, okay. So a mortgage. A mortgage. What's a mortgage? What's the definition of a mortgage?
I still owe money.
Huh?
I still owe money.
So you're saying a mortgage is a loan? Okay, actually it's not a loan.
Collateral.
A mortgage is collateral, it's a lien. It's what you give to the bank to hold on to ensure the repayment of a loan. So when you go through escrow, you have what is called a promissory note, that's the loan, and you have the mortgage. Before the bank accepts the collateral, meaning the security instrument to ensure the repayment of the loan, they gotta make sure that you actually own it, that there's no defect. That's why they require you to go to escrow, called a title company. And the title company, let's say Title Guarantee, its job is to do a title report from the person today, you, going all the way back, and it's supposed to go all the way back to 1845. That's when that was the beginning of private ownership in Hawaii, where the Bureau of Conveyances was recording raw patents, land commission awards, and then deeds followed. They failed to disclose the defective notary. They failed to disclose there was an illegal overthrow of a government. The problem is that's a defect. And they should have said it's a defective title. But they didn't. So what the bank does is, well, we're not going to take the word of the title company. We want the title company to get title insurance to ensure the accuracy of the title search. And that's when you have an insurance agent, let's say from Chicago Title Insurance Company, that works as an underwriter in Title Guarantee's office. And what they do is they underwrite the title report. What they're doing is they're ensuring the accuracy of the search, and the coverage is the amount of money you're borrowing. So if you borrow $100,000, the bank will not accept the mortgage until you secure title insurance that covers the amount of the money borrowed. Because when the bank finds out that there's an error in a title report, then the policy gets activated to pay off the loan. That's how it works. Make sense? And that's all in escrow papers. But again, people didn't even know what they were signing. So wouldn't it be in your best interest to get a title report from Perfect Title Company to show where the defective title is, to have the bank file the insurance claim to pay off your loan? That's what Perfect Title was all about.
I'll be over later.
Well, now it's all game. So basically what happened was, Perfect Title, things started blowing up. Basically, we were saying the emperor has no clothes on, and we can prove it. And man, did things blow up. Ooh. So in 1997, there was a symposium put on by the Hawaii Developers Council, realtors. See, because the realtors weren't getting it straight from the title companies, because the realtors are running into a problem because they got to disclose if there's a possible defect in the title. If they hear it on the news, they even got to disclose if the house is haunted. Not that they got to believe it, they just got to disclose it. If they don't disclose it to the person who bought it, and then they find out that person knew, they can go after and sue that realtor, failure to disclose on a DRA form. So, me and my partner, we knew all this stuff. You notice the approach we're taking, very contractual. This is not arguing or yelling about sovereignty, it's just a consequence. So at this, so the Hawaii Developers Council put on a seminar at the Hawaii Prince Hotel in Waikiki. Over 500 people showed up. Bankers, realtors, attorneys, 500 of them. On the panel was David Peach, president of Title Guarantee Escrow, Bruce Graham from Ashford and Riston, a law firm who also teaches land titles at the law school, Neil Hulbert from Alston and Hunt law firm representing Chicago Title Insurance Company, myself, and Donald Lewis, who was a former principal of Locations Inc., which today is called Prudential Locations. And then there was an attorney from Bank of Hawaii to moderate. It was like taking candy away from them. It was showing slides, names crossed out. Well, off on the public record, the Bureau of Conveyances. People left with their jaw on the ground. Bruce Graham, the attorney, comes up to me after and says, you don't get it. You're taking these people down the wrong road. People are going to get hurt. I said, Bruce, we're a title company. This is just a title report. All you got to do is refute it. And I said, I sent you a title report. And all you got to do is go line by line and refute it. And if you can refute it and we still promote it, they get us on conspiracy and fraud. It's that simple. He says, he tells me, I reviewed it. It is historically and factually correct. Okay? Which is what a title report is supposed to be. It's not a legal opinion. And he says, so I said, well, so what's wrong? He said, well, America's here. That's just the way it is. So I said, gee, I didn't know America was involved with title insurance. See, it's an insurance issue. That's all it is. 2 weeks later, our office is in downtown Honolulu, in the corner of Merchant and Richard Street. We get raided by the Honolulu Police Department, get arrested for racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, and theft. Yeah, the order came down from the governor. Oh yeah, so we found out Hawaii's too small. That was Ben Cayetano back then, and Mazie Hirono as the lieutenant governor. Yeah, Lee Donahue was a deputy chief of police. Went straight to the white collar crime unit. So I get arrested coming down. I'm going, ooh, see, this is when you know it's real. I'm not arrested for trespassing, yeah, $25 fine. It's called racketeering. That's Al Capone stuff. This is real. So to me, I took that as respect to me, because I'm a threat now. We're a threat. Now I just gotta survive. So as I'm walking down from the 5th floor, get out of the elevator, one of the detectives is not participating in the raid. Her name is Detective Jill Cowie from Women Out. Jill Cowie was at a presentation I gave to the SWAT team a few months earlier. Because, you know, Kamehameha grads, we know people in the police department, so I got a call from a friend of mine. So the SWAT team, because it's coming out in the news, right? Says, hey, because they know me. They know me, I'm not a crook. So my friend, Peter, said, hey, Keanu, what's going on? Surprise, what title? Don't believe all this stuff. Hey, you don't mind coming to Beretania Street and giving us one presentation? Not a problem. So went to the basement on Beretania Street, the SWAT team, all Hawaiians. Sitting there was Detective Jill Cowie from the White Collar Crime Unit. Laid it all out. They all said, this is not criminal activity, these are title issues. I said, that's all it is. Jill Cowie refused to participate in the raid. So as I'm coming down in handcuffs, she jumps out of the van and she's crying and she's hugging me. And she's telling me, we didn't have an investigation on you, Keanu. It came from the top. See, that's how I know it. It's not like I'm speculating. And I said, it's okay, Cowie. It's okay, Joe. I said, we weren't investigating you. The purpose was to intimidate. That's what it was. And you know what is eerily familiar? Remember the Kealoha case? You guys see it in the news? The chief of police? Did you know that one of the units actually fabricated a crime against Kealoha's uncle? That he stole a mailbox, made it a federal crime? And they found out that that was actually part of a conspiracy from the police. Now you take a look at what happened to us. It's not far-fetched. So for me, I had to make sure I survived. It was after that, when I took my ring off, nobody's gonna know that I'm married, and I got 2 kids. My oldest son was 8, my youngest one is about 5. Nobody's even gonna know who my family is. Then all of a sudden, I get put in his bucket as a sovereignty activist. And then they drop the charges against us, because they can't do it. Then they get us on a grand jury indictment on attempted theft of property. We attempted to steal property in excess of $10,000 value, the value of the property. Let me give you a hint, you cannot steal land, it doesn't move. Real estate is not the subject of larceny. Personal property is. It was all manufactured, okay? But, as we're walking this, see, to me, they think they're intimidating me. No, they're actually proving I'm right. That's what it is, because if this was frivolous, no worry, right? I don't see sovereignty activists getting arrested for racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, and I don't see that. What we did was we needed to bring the issue. So as Perfect Title was doing its thing to draw attention and show that this is for real, we also formed something. Now, let me ask you, what was overthrown in 1893? What still exists? The Hawaiian Kingdom as a state, right? That's what I knew back then, 1994. What we're going to do is we're not only going to create Perfect Title Company on the Hawaiian Kingdom law, we're going to form a government. Similar to how governments in exile were formed during World War II. So when Belgium was occupied by the Germans, Belgian nationals fled to London, they formed a government in exile under what is called the doctrine of necessity. You can't have a vote if your country's occupied. So by necessity, you form a government in exile. And it has to be under the same rules and laws that applied before the invasion. So what we had to do was do that same thing, because we follow precedents, and we formed what is called the Council of Regency. Regency is not monarch. Regency serves in the absence of a monarch. That's the definition of a regency, right? And we have that provision in the Hawaiian Constitution, Article 33. And I understood how the system worked. So we activated it. So as we're doing perfect title, I was also exposing the occupation of Hawaii. I'm giving lectures. I'm traveling around. And people are thinking I'm a sovereignty activist. No, it's my duty to expose. We have to expose it, right? One of the guys that heard my presentation on the Big Island is a guy named Lance Larson. Never known before that. He said, so you're telling me we gotta follow Hawaiian Kingdom law? I said, yeah, according to the Civil Code and Penal Code. I said, wow, I didn't know that. Well, he ends up on his own, he looks into the law book because he bought a copy of the Civil Code, a Xerox copy. Kinko's had a lot of business from us. You know? And he couldn't find the law on driver's licenses. Why do you think he couldn't find the law in 1893 on driver's licenses? Because there were no automobiles in 1893. The only law that applies to driver's licenses is an American municipal law called HRS, or revised statutes. So what he did on his own, he took his license plate off, put a big placard on the back of his Jeep Comanche, restating Section 6 of the Hawaiian Civil Code. The laws are obligatory upon all persons, whether subjects of this kingdom or citizens or subjects of any foreign state, while within the limits of this kingdom. And he started driving around Hilo. And he got a lot of tickets. Then he got to go to court. He's represented by an attorney named Ian Parks. And this is at the old courthouse in Keanu by the police station. So Linnea, who knows I know my stuff, said, I want you to be an expert witness in this case that explains why my client has to follow Hawaiian Kingdom law. So I was brought in. Judge Sandra Schutte was the judge. This is in 1998. And I was qualified as an expert witness. The prosecution was trying to, refute me, and I kept correcting them. And the judge said, stop. Mr. Sai, not Dr. Syed, Mr. Sai is an expert. Cool. So now I can answer Linnea Park's questions. No treaty. Bottom line, no treaty. These all-American laws limited to U.S. territory. So the judge basically came out with her decision and fined Lance Larson about $900. And then she asked Lance Larson, are you going to pay this? He said, no, you didn't show me the treaty. Otherwise, I'm going to be committing treason against the Hawaiian Kingdom, the country. And she said, that's what I thought you said. She ordered him incarcerated for 30 days, 7 days solitary confinement. Now his attorney, Linnea Parks, is concerned for the safety of Lance Larson because she thinks he's going to get beaten in the prison. Right? So she turns to me now in a different way. Now instead of being an expert witness, she's now looking at me and saying, you're part of the acting government, the Council of the Regions, you're supposed to be protecting Hawaiian subjects. I said, yeah, we carry that responsibility. It's like a private becoming a lieutenant in time of war, right, by necessity. Yeah, we assume the role of the government. Yes, we're supposed to, but we're not liable because the United States is supposed to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law, not us. We're being occupied. We have no effectiveness. We're just exposing this stuff. So she ended up filing a court case in Honolulu at the federal court, Lance Larson versus the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom. Judge Samuel King's chambers, he was the judge in this case. She finds out that the United States was going to move to dismiss the case, so she tells me that the Hawaiian government is still liable for protecting my client and is liable for reparations, for damages. I said, this court, this federal court in Honolulu is just as illegal as that court in Kea'au, all created by American law in the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I said, you know what we do? And I recommended this to her. Dismiss the United States off the complaint with prejudice, dismiss them. And we will enter into a binding arbitration agreement to leapfrog from the federal court in Honolulu to the permanent court of arbitration in the Netherlands. Because they deal with international disputes. And this is an international dispute. So we signed off on the binding arbitration agreement, and Judge Samuel King signed off on it. And then it went to The Hague. Now when it went to The Hague, the Permanent Court of Arbitration has to verify that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists as a country before they can accept the case under a dispute and resolve it, so to form a tribunal. So they had to determine whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists. Now this whole dispute was all about the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws, which led to the violation of Mr. Larson's rights. Does that make sense? So, this is the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands. The International Court of Justice is here. The Permanent Court of Arbitration is here. And that's me representing the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Hawaiian Council of Regency. Actually arguing cases up there, arguing the case. Okay. So we're actually there, right? Pretty mind-blowing, right? But because everybody in Hawaii was still playing basketball, nobody could understand what was happening. They thought this was a sovereignty stunt. You can't get into that court unless you're a country, right? And some people say, oh, you just can't go in. No, you can't. Did you know the South China Sea case? You guys heard of the South China Sea case? China's building islands. Philippines versus China. Taiwan. Taiwan was affected by that, right? Did you know Taiwan was trying to join in the proceedings? They were denied by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Why? Because they're not an independent state. And the Chinese president, the Taiwan president, was angry about that. So they were forced to deal with China's participation. They wanted to get involved. Now you apply that same principle to us. We got in because they verified the Hawaiian Kingdom exists. So what is the Permanent Court of Arbitration? It's an intergovernmental organization that forms ad hoc tribunal. Ad hoc means a spontaneous entity, not a standing tribunal. So normally arbitration, the way it works is your dispute is submitted to the court, and the court will look at the dispute and find arbitrators that have expertise on that particular dispute. So if you have a dispute on boundaries, then they recommend experts in boundaries that serve as arbitrators. If you have a violation of the law of occupation, you get experts on the law of occupation. That's what arbitration is all about, where the arbitrators are not just judges, but they're also experts. Yeah, that's the whole point of arbitration. So the PCA has what is called institutional jurisdiction. Before they can facilitate the formation of tribunals, they gotta verify the standing of the parties. At least one of them has to be an existing state. Again, remember that term, state. Now the Permanent Court of Arbitration, remember I told you it was formed under the Hague Convention, number 1, right? The Hague Convention number 1 basically provided for countries to ratify the treaty. And today there are 122 countries that ratified that treaty, including the United States. And what they do is they also participate in what is called an administrative council. And this administrative council basically maintains the court. So all the diplomats of these treaty partners, of these countries that signed the treaty, if they have an embassy or consulate in The Hague or in the Netherlands, they sit on the administrative council. And that's where they go over the budget. And each country, as a contracting power, has to put so much money in. Just like how you put dues in for the United Nations. And they manage it, right? But Article 47 of the Hague Convention that formed the court allows non-contracting powers to access the court for dispute if you didn't ratify it. And a non-contracting power can participate and utilize the entity, but they have to pay for the proceedings. The other countries don't have to pay because they already pay to their yearly dues, right? So for us, the Hawaiian Kingdom is not a contracting power. We're actually a non-contracting power coming in. So they got to verify, number 1, that we are a power called a state. And if we're a non-contracting power, then that allows us access to the court. So what they got to do is they got to determine whether one of the parties is a state and whether or not it's a contracting power or a non-contracting power. So first here is between 2 states. And this is one of the handouts that you folks have. So this one, between 2 states, Republic of Ecuador versus the United States. That's what this is. It's from the case repository. Now if you notice, it has the case name, case description, which is application of a particular provision of a treaty, and then where they identify the name of the claimant, which is like a plaintiff, Republic of Ecuador, state. United States of America, state, meaning they're an existing state. Now, both of these countries are contracted. Then the second type of dispute they can take up is between a state and an international organization. I don't have a copy of this for you folks, but here's a case between Peru and the United Nations. And the Permanent Court of Arbitration identified Peru as a state, United Nations as an international organization. For the Hawaiian Kingdom, when the case started, this is Larson versus the Hawaiian Kingdom. We're the defendants. He's claiming that we are liable for allowing the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws over him that led to his incarceration and his unfair trial. That's the dispute, right? So when the case started, Linnea Parks initiated the process because she's a plaintiff, right? She's a claimant. When they received it in November of 1999, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the registry, now had to vet it. They had to look into whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists as a state. That was the issue. So from November of 1999 until February of 2000, the Permanent Court of Arbitration was vetting this situation. I get a call. Actually, I called the court for on a procedural question, and I was asked to stay on the line because the Secretary General, his name is Van den Hout, the Dutch national, wants to talk to me. So he jumps on the line and he says, Mr. Sutton, because I'm representing the Hawaiian government. He says, I'm the agent. He goes, that they reviewed all the records and there is no evidence, he says, that the Hawaiian Kingdom does not exist. That's what he said. And then he also acknowledged that the Hawaiian-Dutch treaty with the Netherlands hasn't been canceled because we have a treaty with the Dutch where the court is in the territory. And then he says, and these were his specific words, in order to maintain the integrity of this case, because they were walking on pins and needles up there. In order to maintain the integrity of this case, he recommends that the Hawaiian government provide a formal invitation to the United States to join in the arbitration. And I went, that's a good idea. That led to a meeting on March 3rd in Washington, D.C. between John Crook from the U.S. State Department, Linnea Parks representing Lance Larson, and me. And John Crook from the State Department, he said, and the Permanent Court of Arbitration accepted this case because he thought Hawaii was the 50th state. I said, yeah. And in fact, it was the Secretary General that recommended that we provide the invitation. Because you can somehow try to explain how American municipal laws can be applied in a foreign country. And he started to watch his P's and Q's. So basically, I was calling his bluff, the United States bluff. You know, in the past of playing basketball, we were told that we're playing with the United States the card game of Old Maile. Then they changed the game to Go Fish. Then they changed the name to 52 Pickup. Picking up the cards. And I found out, it's not Go Fish, it's not Old Maile, it's not 52 Pickup, this is poker. And we got to roll flush. And brother, I know you got nothing. I'm gonna call you bluff. That pretty much was what we did. We called the bluff. Show us your hand. 1 week later, I get a call, well, a few weeks later, I get a call after we return home from the Deputy Secretary General, Phyllis Hamilton from the court, and she's an American. She tells me that the American Embassy in The Hague notified the Permanent Court of Arbitration of the answer to my invitation on behalf of the Hawaiian government. And she said that the United States respectfully declines the invitation to join in the arbitration. Yeah, I understand why. But they asked permission from the Hawaiian government if they could have access to all records and pleadings of the case. You know what they just did right there? Huh? They explicitly acknowledged the Hawaiian Kingdom government to give them permission to have access to the proceeding, to the pleadings. And I said, absolutely. Not a problem. We're going to open up this room, open all the doors. This is transparency. Nobody's hiding anything. It was then the tribunal of 3 arbitrators was formed. And then filing of the pleadings, which led to the hearings in the Netherlands in December of 2000. So, between a state and a private entity, Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom. It says here, Lance Paul Larson, a resident of Hawaii, brought a claim against the Hawaiian Kingdom by its Council of Regency on the grounds that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom is in violation of these treaties for allowing the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws over him within the territorial jurisdiction of the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's the basis of the dispute. This was not about whether or not the Hawaiian Kingdom exists. This is because the Hawaiian Kingdom exists and whether or not the Hawaiian government is liable for reparations to be paid to Mr. Larson for what happened to him. Right? And then they identify Lance Paul Larson as a private entity and the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state. That's exactly what they identified the United States as, a state. And then these are the three arbitrators that stepped in. Two of these arbitrators, Crawford and Greenwood, became judges on the International Court of Justice. So it gives you the idea of the caliber of the people who are sitting on the tribunal. And there's Linnea Parks, representing Lance Larson, and there's me, representing the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I know the case very well. When I came home, I was trying to explain to people what happened, and they're trying to tell me, no, that's not what happened. What? No. I read everything. That's not what happened. I'm like, whoa, mean. You think I'm making this stuff up? And I said, basketball. You cannot talk to people like that. So let me take something back. So the last day of the hearing was 3 days of hearings in the Netherlands. And basically the question was whether or not Lance Larson could move against the acting government for not protecting him without the United States participating. Because it was the United States that locked him up, not us. It was the United States that put him through an unfair trial, not us, through American municipal laws. What he was trying to do was to determine, are we liable for those violations? So they cannot make a determination that the United States violated these particular rights of Lance Larson under the laws of war without the United States participating. It's called the indispensable third party rule. That's a rule in international law. So basically Lance Larson had to kind of get around that. Now, the South China Sea case actually got around that. So the South China Sea case was Philippines versus China. 2014, I believe, the case started in The Hague. The tribunal on its own, just like the Larson case in 2013 or 14, they brought up the issue of the indispensable third party rule. Okay, China's a part of the case, Philippines part of the case, but they asked, would our decision reflect the conduct of countries or states that are not participating, like Vietnam, Indonesia, Brunei, because they also border the South China Sea. It's not just the Philippines and China. So what happened was, the Philippines had to present pleadings that says, no, you can't. And you know what they did? They did exactly what Lance Larson's attorney couldn't do. So in order to get around the indispensable third party rule in coming out with an arbitration award or decision that needs to be executed, they were asked by the Philippines, all we're looking at is fact-finding. All we want you to do is to determine whether or not these built-up islands are actually rocks or islands. Because under the law of the Sea Convention, an island has to be self-sufficient. If it's self-sufficient, then a 200-mile exclusive economic zone can apply. 200 miles. But if it's a rock, meaning it's not self-sustaining, it's only a 12-mile limit. China was claiming a 200-mile limit on all these built-up atolls. The tribunal said, yes, we can do that. So that's how Philippines got around the indispensable third-party rule. And they operated similar to a fact-finding. In our case, the tribunal said that the United States is an indispensable third party. They can't move against the acting government without having the United States answer to their conduct. But they recommended we could go fact-finding. And fact-finding in arbitration award says we can't go because they're going to find out facts. So the question is, who's liable for prosecution as to who violated Lance Larson's rights? who is liable for prosecution by a tribunal for war crimes. So that was the decision. Now, on the last day of the hearing, we were called by an ambassador from Rwanda who was at the court, who heard about our case. Okay? He accessed the records. Just as we made it public for the United States, we made it public for any country. So this guy, Dr. Bill Gazawa, contacts us and says he needs to meet with us in Brussels, Belgium, if we can catch the train. So we did, the day after the last day of the hearing, 3 days of hearings. And in our meeting, he tells me that his government has reviewed all the records and it is clear Hawaii is occupied. And that Rwanda is prepared to report to the United Nations General Assembly the prolonged occupation of Hawaii. And that was December of 2000, 19 years ago. I'm sitting there and I need to talk to my legal team. So I sat back down in front of the ambassador. Please convey our sincere gratitude to your president, but we cannot accept this offer at this time. We have to go home and begin to address denationalization because our people back home have no clue of what's going on. This is 19 years ago. And he thanked me. I thanked him. When I got home, the plan was we're going to expose the occupation and we're going to engage the denationalization that has been institutionalized in the school system. The plan was for me to enter the University of Hawaii, political science, get my master's degree specializing in international relations and my PhD, provide a solution, how do we fix this problem? And since that time, hitting it, and we actually was able to get things moving unbelievably. In less than 2 decades, we've effectively changed the discourse. Effectively changed it. So academic publications, I'm going to push for dissertations, master's theses, law journals, peer-reviewed journals, articles, get it out. Make it international, not just here, right? And that's what started a plethora of research. Law journal articles, doctoral dissertations, master's theses, all about Hawaii being occupied, all in different aspects. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, you know. And the final article that came out that I'm citing here, not final, but the last article I cite here, was an article written by Dennis Riches for a journal in Japan. He's Canadian. The title is, "This is Not America, the acting government of the Hawaiian Kingdom goes global with legal challenges to end occupation." All of a sudden, we've managed to change the discourse where people are now talking occupation internationally. Yeah. Now, this education and research has prompted Tom Kaufman to address a problem he had on his book that he published in 1998, the 100th anniversary of the so-called annexation of Hawaii, joint resolution of annexation. This is 1998. Look at the subtitle here. Nation Within, the story of America's annexation of the nation of Hawaii. Obviously, that's not correct, right? Because Hawaii wasn't annexed. You can't annex a foreign country by passing a law. Remember Senator Allen? It's ipso facto void. You can't do it, right? Well, in 2009, he made a change. In the second edition, look at the title now, The History of the American Occupation of Hawaii. Now, what prompted him to make that change? Well, he explains it. And actually, he called me before he made the change. He says, "Keanu, I just want to let you know, because of what you guys have done and are continuing to do at the university with all this research, I couldn't deny Hawaii's occupied." And he said it was hard for him because he's an American. He saw it, but he didn't want to accept it. He said we helped him get over that hump. So here's his explanation. A note on the second edition. I am compelled to add that the continued relevance of this book reflects a far-reaching political, moral, and intellectual failure of the United States to recognize and deal with its takeover of Hawaii. In the book's subtitle, the word annexation has been replaced by the word occupation, referring to America's occupation of Hawaii. Where annexation connotes or means legality by mutual agreement, the act was not mutual and therefore not legal. Since by definition of international law, there was no annexation, we are then left with the word occupation. In making this change, I have embraced the logical conclusion of my research into the events of 1893 to 1898 in Honolulu and Washington. I am prompted to take this step by a growing body of historical work by a new generation of Native Hawaiian scholars. Dr. Keanu writes, and he's quoting my law journal article, the challenge for the fields of political science, history, and law is to distinguish between the rule of law and the politics of power. He ends with, in the history of Hawaii, the might of the United States does not make it right. That sums it all up right there. But you can see the effect that education has had. And it's not based on culture. It's not based on race. It's called intellect. It's called comprehension. Yeah. Now in this year, last year, February 25th, a memorandum came out from Geneva. That's this document. And this was also, this guy was affected by education. So this is a UN independent expert, very similar to what is called a special rapporteur. So he has authority. Now when he wrote this in February of 2018, he retired. His term ended in April of 2018. So when he wrote this, he's a UN guy, right? So he says, as a professor of international law, the former secretary of the UN Human Rights Committee, co-author of this particular book, and currently serving as a UN independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, I have come to understand, because he didn't know it before, because I saw his 2013 report. He was referring to Hawaii as if it was a native Hawaiian issue with self-determination. This is a complete 180-degree turn. I've come to understand that the lawful political status of the Hawaiian Islands is that of a sovereign nation-state in continuity, but a nation-state that is under a strange form of occupation by the United States, resulting from an illegal military occupation and a fraudulent annexation. As such, international laws, the Hague and Geneva Conventions, require that governance and legal matters within the occupied territory of the Hawaiian Islands must be administered by the application of the laws of the occupied state, in this case, the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the domestic laws of the occupier, the United States. What he's doing is he's merely citing international law. He's not coming out with a Rosetta Stone that he figured it out. Because this was precisely the issue at The Hague, at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So can you see what happens when people get educated? They start to do things that they're supposed to do, right? Now when you say that when this guy says you're supposed to follow the Hague and Geneva Conventions, you know when he said it's a strange form of occupation? The reason why it's strange, because the United States is not administering the laws of the occupied state. That's why it's strange. Well, he says you're supposed to follow the Hague and Geneva Conventions. What happens if you don't follow it? See, people who are in the military know what happens if you don't follow the Hague and Geneva Conventions. But let's see what Amnesty International says, what it is. Definition of war crimes. Crimes that violate the laws or customs of war defined by the Geneva and Hague Conventions. War crimes. What you guys are starting to realize is education was like speeding up this wheel in the air, right? What you're starting to see is this wheel is moving down and about to hit asphalt, where the rubber meets the road. What you don't want to do is be between the rubber and the road. Right? It's no longer an intellectual exercise. Now it's liability. And what exactly are the violations that could be constituted as war crimes? Now, part of this education was also kicked off 2017, and then also culminated in 2018. At the same time, the UN independent expert came out with this. You folks ever heard of the National Education Association? Okay, so the National Education Association is the largest union of public school teachers and faculty and staff, which also includes universities, right? The Hawaii State Teachers Association represents public school teachers that are an affiliate member of the NEA. And every year, they have a convention where they pass resolutions, okay? Well, the Hawaii State Teachers Association introduced the resolution that got passed on July 4th, 2017, Boston, Massachusetts. So this is from their Facebook, Hawaii State Teachers Association. It says, today, the National Education Association's Representative Assembly, meeting in Boston, approved new business item 37. Quote, the NEA will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and resources of the land. That passed. 1,000 delegates actually voted on it. It passed in America. That is a product of education. Awareness. So when the delegates came home, I was speaking to Amy Caruso. She, at that time, was the secretary/treasurer of HSTA. And she's also a history teacher at Mililani High School. And she teaches about Hawaii's occupation. Majority of her students are children of the military who are at Schofield Barracks. And the way she teaches it historically, not politically. And she had no gripes coming from any parent about what the kids are learning. And she was voted by the NEA as runner-up to the Teacher of the Year. Yeah. She took second place. I told Amy, you didn't take second place. You actually are Teacher of the Year, because that applies to America. You're in the Hawaiian Kingdom. She laughed. She goes, I never thought about it like that. I said, yeah, hey, you're the #1 teacher. So when they got home, I spoke to her. She asked if I could write the articles for them to submit to NEA. So I did. First one was published last year, 2018, on April 2nd. The illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government. There's me. You notice I said overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom government, not the Hawaiian Kingdom. And I explained that in there. Right? Then the second article was published, the U.S. occupation of the Hawaiian Kingdom, on October 1st last year. And it gets into the limitation of U.S. law, what is a municipal law, just like what I explained to you folks. And then the third article, the impact of the U.S. occupation on the Hawaiian people, October 13th. And that went over denationalization that took place in the schools and how Queens Hospital got hijacked. Yeah. In there, state of war, war crimes, it's all there. Nothing's being held back. For the Council of Regency, this right here was a crowning jewel to what we started in January 2001 to begin the exposure. This has now hit across classrooms of the United States. That's what's important. Also, it started to affect people in government. So a few months back, The Guardian did a story on a councilwoman named Jennifer Ruggles on the Big Island because she realized she's committing war crimes if she legislates, right? Passing American laws for the county of Hawaii, county council. So this British newspaper published this story on November 30th of last year. Hawaii politician stops voting, claiming islands are occupied sovereign country. See, it's kind of spreading out there, huh? And then the reporter actually called me to get some quotes. So now I'm talking to a British newspaper, so I need to focus on Britain, right? So it says here in our article, Keanu, a political science lecturer at the University of Hawaii and member of the Hawaiian Kingdom Provisional Government, which is the Council of Regency, says the unilateral annexation of Hawaii by passing a law was tantamount to the U.S. passing a law annexing the UK or any other country. See, because it's a British newspaper, so I gotta say UK, right? If it's a Chinese paper, then I say China. If it's Japanese, I say Japan. So I say, if you can't pass a law annexing a foreign country, what is pretty cool about this, the reporter reached out to the State Department and the state of Hawaii for comment on what's going on with the Congress, with the councilwoman. Both said no comment. When you say no comment, it's deafening. What they're supposed to say to a British newspaper, this is frivolous, always a 50th state, these are crazy people. No comment. They're going, uh-oh. So let me end this presentation with the final statement coming from the Hawaiian Kingdom Supreme Court in 1848, which is so appropriate to what is going on around, what is going on now, right? Now, it's like, you almost like, it's like, when I'm saying this stuff, it's like everything is falling, you know? And that's when everybody gets scared. Do you know what this would cause? You know what? It's still illegal. No matter how you get around it, it is. And you know, my job is to fix the problem. That's my dissertation. We can fix it, but you gotta understand how the game is played. And that's where everybody gets scared. Well, the Hawaii Supreme Court came up with an excellent point that I love. So, Silber versus Waldo, 1848. Chief Justice William Lee. For I trust that the maxim, which is a principle of this court, ever has been and ever will be that which is so beautifully expressed in the Hawaiian coat of arms. Namely, the life of the land is preserved by righteousness. We know of no other rule to guide us in the decision of questions of this kind than the supreme law of the land. And to this we bow with reverence and veneration, even though the stroke fall on our own head. In the language of another, let justice be done, though the heavens fall. Let the law be obeyed, though it ruin every judicial and executive officer in the kingdom. Courts may err, it's another word for error. Clerks may err, marshals may err. They err in every land daily. But when they err, let them correct their errors without consulting pride, expediency, or any other consequence. I mean, that is so appropriate, huh? And that's what we're dealing with. The heavens are falling. Get used to it. But there's a way to don't worry about the heavens, because see, you know how you deal with the heavens falling? It's called huliao. Turn everything upside down, and the heavens are actually up. See, because from denationalization, what they did to us is they made us walk upside down. What I'm doing is right side up. What you think are, as far as the heavens falling,